Hey, we're back on the Morning Brew with Friends. This is great. We're talking with Tamara. I'm trying to pronounce it right. Tamara K. New in Albuquerque, working for
Relatively
UNM.
new.
And you're a sociology professor, and you've gotten wrapped up in politics all of a sudden.
Go figure.
Right. Well, we had on a couple weeks ago our friends from the Rio Grande Foundation. We had a lieutenant governor. They were talking about right to work.
Right.
And we were talking, they brought in some great numbers. It turns out, though, from a statistical point of view, the numbers for right to work really don't line up, do they?
No. I have publicly talked about them as being kindergarten math.
Right. And you ended up going up and going to the folks at the legislature.
Right.
And talking to them about this is how you actually do a statistical analysis of something. And the statistics we have on right to work legislation, which is one of the biggest things right now in the legislature, really change how the laws in the state really deal with unions. Basically, now there is the way New Mexico's laws have kind of evolved through the years is we have what we call a right to dues provision. So if you join a union shop, you pay union dues. And it's just many states are like us, and it's not something uncommon, but one of the economic development issues this session is trying to change that law. But the folks that are trying to do it are using math that is not fully figured out, am I right?
Right. And just to clarify, the current law, employees don't have to join the union.
No.
They just have to pay their fare of dues.
The fair share laws, yes.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Because the union, regardless, has to
Represent
advocate
you.
for them.
Right.
Right.
Right. And
So-
it's just a way that the New Mexico's laws and many of the states' laws have worked out, and it helps unions and it helps protect workers, was the idea originally.
Right.
And now they're saying that there are other states, I think Kentucky went right to work, and so did, I guess it was Michigan.
Right.
Was the other one. So how did you get involved in this?
So I got involved because I was reading the press on this issue, and I started to see that advocates for right to work were arguing using very bad, as I said, kindergarten math,
Right.
which basically means using averages to predict outcomes. So this
So
is
I drink,
statistically
on average, 18 cups of coffee a day. Therefore, yeah.
Right. So let me give you a really easy example that doesn't require a visual. There's actually a set of Danish statistical studies that shows that where there are high stork populations, there's actually higher human birth rates.
But storks are not related to people.
Storks are not delivering babies, the last I heard. So what that shows us is that there appears to be a statistical relationship when there isn't. And so what statisticians and social scientists do is they control for using what we call a regression analysis, which basically means we make everything equal so that what we're actually looking for having an effect on is we get a pure result at the end of it.
Okay.
Right? So in the stork example, what you would do is you would...
Well, there's two different things you're looking at. You're looking at births, you're looking at storks.
Right.
But when it gets complicated, you have to start bringing in many more pieces of data, don't
Right.
you?
And we know that there isn't really a relationship between storks and human birth rates. The seeming relationship comes from the fact that storks tend to live in rural areas where traditionally there are higher human birth rates historically, weather, things like that.
Right.
Right. And so in the case of the right to work law, so-called studies that I've looked at, and they're not very scientific.
They just had like 7 or 8 variables, right?
7 or 8 variables.
And then
that
you
they're
found
controlling
one.
for.
You found one. I wrote about this at Business First, and we found one that was a study. I think it was 42 different variables.
Right. So the current chief economist for the U.S. Department of Labor did what is considered sort of the gold standard study, where she controlled for 42 variables. Right. So in the stork baby example, that would be
2.
Right. It would
Or
would
even
be
1, I guess, in that one.
In the stork baby example, you'd control for weather, you control for rural areas, and so what she did was she controlled for all those industrial variables, employment variables, holding constant the relationship so that we could see the pure or real outcome of right to work laws.
And what did you see? Because when Lieutenant Governor was here the other day, and when Paul Gessing from the Rio Grande Foundation were here, they were saying that in the states that have gone right to work recently, they are seeing large bumps in economic development.
Yeah.
That's
kindergarten math.
That's the kindergarten math at play.
Right. So basically, in the study by the
and then here's the story that you and I wrote together about
yeah.
all of that at Business First.
Right. So what the gold standard actual research study found is that right to work, when controlling for everything else, actually lowers wages by about $1,500 a year for union and non-union employees, and it worsens the likelihood that union and non-union employees are going to get health insurance and pensions. But the important part is, too, there's absolutely no impact on economic growth. So this argument that
not
we're
at all, because the big argument has been that
none at all.
When it comes to site selectors and people who help bring companies here and help grow companies in states like New Mexico, the big argument is that that's a deciding factor. They won't, especially companies like Intel or wherever else would say, we're not going to expand into Mexico because of right to work.
Well, especially with the high-tech companies.
Because they're not unionized anyway.
Well, the ones that we would want to attract in Albuquerque and New Mexico in general would be ones where they're high-paying good jobs.
Yeah.
And there is actually a good research study that shows that for those kinds of businesses, what they're looking for has nothing to do with right to work. It has to do with well-educated workers, right? It has
They're looking
to do
for
with
a qualified workforce,
Right.
not necessarily the workforce that is the cheapest.
Right, exactly.
Is there any correlation between cheap labor like we have in New Mexico and growth in these companies that you've looked at?
No.
No.
And
Wow.
I think that the important thing is to keep in mind that in these so-called studies, right to work laws are the stork.
Okay.
Right? And that
Yeah.
folks who are pushing these bad statistics are basically falling into the stork baby trap over and over and over again.
Is this something that only happens in New Mexico?
No, actually, we're looking at it in Wisconsin. So in the last few days, the Wisconsin legislature has decided that they're going to try to pass one of these. And they use, a lot of the proponents across the country look at other states that have done it. And one of the main states that people look at is Oklahoma. And so
Because they went right to work in, 2001?
2001.
Yeah.
And so the proponents of right to work have argued that, Oklahoma, per capita personal income increase.
Right. Oklahoma City's been kind of laid out as one of the grand economic development wins of the last 5, 6, 7 years.
But if you look at the stork baby comparison, what actually had an impact in Oklahoma was not
Oil?
right to work. It was increased oil and gas prices. And the measure that the proponents look at is per capita personal income, which includes wealthy people's investments. Right? So what was actually happening in Oklahoma, wealthy people were investing in oil and gas. Their personal income was going up and their investment income was going up. What we should have looked at, what the proponents should have looked at, is actually ordinary people's wages.
Wage growth, not investment growth.
Right, and actually manufacturing in Oklahoma in the 10 years after right to work was passed in Oklahoma, manufacturing employment decreased significantly.
Very cool.
So good math, very important.
Right, no doubt. Well, it's one of those things that I think a lot of us, you end up taking people, well, there's a study. It was done, But that's not the only thing you're studying while you're here. What else, quickly, are you studying here at UNM? And what are you working on as a sociology professor?
Oh, my own personal research?
Your own personal research.
Well, actually, I am generally an expert in economic development, in international trade policy. So my first book was on the North American Free Trade Agreement and the impact on labor and unions. And
what are you working on now?
Right now I'm working on a book that looks at economic development organizations, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and how they work with counterparts in different countries. So I've been all over the world.
Excellent. Coolest place you've been lately?
India.
Very cool. And are they seeing economic growth there?
Economic growth.
Is it mainly still from outsourcing and offshoring, as they call it? Or
in India?
Yeah.
Well, we see a lot of call centers in India, for example, a lot of our work. I just recently talked to a colleague, and he was telling me that a lot of our academic presses are using outsourced labor to do all the editing in India and Bangladesh.
A lot of work. A lot of work. We'll talk more about this, and we'll bring in the museum, and Andy Shea, we'll talk a whole lot more on the Morning Brew with Friends.